Yeah, Dwayne Bryant here with Zoetis, and just my pleasure to be able to introduce Andrew here this morning. If anybody's been on social media, Andrew should be no stranger to you. Andrew is very present and really great advocate for us on social media. The last couple of years, things like the hashtag Farm365, and last year he just did a farm video every week of the year on different farms and that, so he's certainly doing his part to get the word out there. He does have a bio here, and I'll read that out for everybody. For those of you that are not on social media and don't know Andrew. So Andrew farms, has a passion for agriculture and advocacy, social media, and of course new technology. Farm is known as Bellson Farms, and he and his family milk Holsteins there. They grow corn, soybeans, wheat, hay, and down in southern Ontario there in Middlesex County. With all kinds of information available about modern farms and not all of it being true, Andrew's keen to make sure people get the full story on what farmers do on a daily basis, why they do it, and what they care about. He's been featured on CBC, CTV, and other media outlets across Canada for his work in opening up his farm with pictures and social media as the fresh air farmer. When he isn't farming and traveling, you'll find him spending time at home with his young family, curling at the local club, and just enjoying the view from his front porch. So without further ado, please welcome Andrew Campbell.
Thanks, Shane. Appreciate it. Well, thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. Good start. It's gone black. So thanks for having me. I'll be on my way, I guess. No, I'll let Lori fix that up. Oh, thank you. You're good. Oh, not yet. Well, it is a pleasure to be here. Dwayne mentioned that, things I'm definitely getting more curling in right now than views from the front porch. In Middlesex County, those nice pictures that Mike had of just, you could see the corn stalks in underneath the snow like that is a beautiful winter in Middlesex County. Unfortunately, we have basically an Elmwood winter in Middlesex County as well, which I don't know about you, but snow and cold is getting old pretty fast. It was something that fortunately I did get used to. I see quite a few familiar faces. This is not my first beef day. I know that I spent quite a few days coming up to Elmwood when I was working at CKNX, doing the farm news job, which I got thinking about on the way up here, is almost 10 years ago, so that's terrifying to me now. But certainly one of those things that, when I was doing the world of news and agriculture information, because that was really what I wanted to do coming out of school, was be involved in that. Sitting around meeting tables and dinner tables and things like that with, a lot of you in the room and things like that really spurred up that passion for agriculture, and it was one of those things that kind of actually drove me home, not you specifically, but certainly just, the idea of being involved in the industry and wanting to go home and milk cows. So that's what we're doing now. This is kind of a few photos from around our place. Since I did, I took a girl with me from Bruce County, and I hauled her down to Middlesex with me. We got married down there, 2 kids now, 5 and 3, so Christmas was the most fun I think it's been in a long time around our place because they all got it, and it was a pretty exciting time. And then, to cap it all off, I pushed about a foot of snow around the driveway, so my son, who loves driving tractor, got to then ride in the tractor. He'd open all these presents, and the most exciting thing of the day, he told me at the end of the day, was when he got to push snow. So I guess there is some excitement to snow anyway. But one of the things that also, since I've headed home, has still been that kind of connection with a lot of people that I did meet outside of agriculture. Certainly, especially when I was doing the news stuff and going to school and things like that, was all of a sudden their fascination with how their food is produced. And I don't know if you remember, this is going back within that 10 to 15 year time frame. that a couple of times there would be buses. The Federation, I think, was arranging the buses, and we went to Queen's Park one time and went to Parliament Hill another time, because obviously BSE was a big challenge, but grain prices were tough, pork prices were tough. And I remember riding those buses as that kind of, farm reporter at the time, and talking with a lot of you. And the big question, I think, for a lot of us was this idea that why doesn't anybody care about farmers? There was this real struggle, and nobody seemed to care about where their food comes from. You never saw a story about a farmer or food production in the daily paper. There was this idea that we need to be heard more so that people understand our challenges. Fast forward to today, and we've probably had enough of that, I think, that all of a sudden the attention is probably gone the other way. That now, if you open the Globe and Mail or the National Post or the Toronto Star, find a day where there isn't a story that has something to do with agriculture, whether it be an agriculture company, whether it be a food production practice, whether it be actually something on the more negative side of things, phosphorus runoff in lakes or, different things like that. So all of a sudden now we are in the spotlight, and maybe we're not as comfortable as we necessarily wanted, partly because the message isn't all about, the good of agriculture, but obviously some of the negative things that some, maybe we have to deal with, others that obviously aren't true to begin with. So where I want to start today in the next hour or so is, first of all, give you the option that I'm just going to talk. Lori asked, can I go longer? Now we've kind of caught up on time since, but if I could go longer, and I said I could talk all day if I wanted. So I'm going to keep going. If you have questions, I want you to raise your hand. I'd rather deal with them when you had the question, when we're on a particular subject, than have you forget it at the end, because you're going to think you can remember it, you're not going to write it down, and then at the end you're going to forget what your question was. So ask away as we go along, and we'll get the mic around too at that time. But where I want to start is on our consumer, and not necessarily your customer, because your customer, Mike's in a little bit different situation where his customer walks into the store, but for a lot of us, our customer is, a Cargill, is a butcher around town, somebody else, not the end consumer. But we're going to say that our customer is that end consumer, because obviously their decision at the grocery store trickles down through the rest of the chain and ends up, on your plate and how you're going to produce that product. So we have a challenge in that most consumers are looking at their dinner table and thinking what this woman's thinking right now. What is she thinking? Anybody? Just yell it out.
Why'd the beer taste so good?
Why'd the beer taste? No, we're not Janie O'Shea. This is not what she's thinking. This is not after New Year's Eve. Good try. That may be around the O'Shea house, but not around every house. Pretend it's about January the 30th. No excitement. What's she thinking? Should I go healthy or not healthy? So, what's between the buns there? We'd hope beef, because we'd assume she's an intelligent person. What's wrong with beef? Nothing. Of course there's nothing wrong with beef. But she is being told that maybe there is. That all of a sudden I should, it's the new year, I'm day 3 on my New Year's resolution, already tired of it. Should I have this, but I want that? Of course, how much protein does iceberg lettuce offer your diet? Iron? B12? Of course it doesn't. Beef is where you're going to get those essential nutrients. But that's not how the conversation is being framed today. The conversation, when somebody goes into the grocery store, and keep in mind that if they go into a grocery store, if you go into, a big one in Hanover or Owen Sound or Listowel or somewhere like that, some of the bigger ones, the estimate is that you have the choice between somewhere around 30 and 40,000 different products walking into that store. And if you think about it, it's, at one time you went and you got mustard, right? Now you go and you could get honey mustard or Dijon mustard or hot mustard or mild mustard or green mustard or purple mustard or whatever it is. There's all sorts of different offerings, right? And so when you walk out of that store, you're going to take, 20 items home with you? Maybe 30 or 40 coming into Christmas? Out of 40,000. How are you as a customer, put yourself in her shoes, how are you deciding which items you're buying? Part of her challenge is that she is being marketed to death to and doesn't necessarily realize it. She is being told that you have a right choice and a wrong choice to make. Don't make the wrong one. And that puts our end customer in a pretty tough spot when they don't necessarily have all the facts, but are being told that here's your right choice, here's your wrong choice. It's New Year's. Start your resolution off right. Eat this, not that. When really, obviously, that's not what we should be telling our customer. Obviously, we need a nice balanced diet, right? So, also, what the consumer is thinking is, how is this food produced? So more and more are consumers interested in things like GMOs. They have no idea what a GMO is, how it impacts them, what it does, none of that, but they're concerned about it. Gluten, for instance. The gluten-free craze that is subsiding a bit, but certainly no one, or at least most of them who decided they were going gluten-free, had any idea what gluten was. But they were told it was bad for them. And so therefore they started to avoid it. Hormones, antibiotics, treatment of animals, all of those things we constantly see become more and more concerning for someone. So when they are deciding what to eat, all of a sudden nutrition isn't the only thing they're concerned about. But where's it from? How's it produced? How many times was that steer patted on the head before it was sent to market? Things like this now matter to a customer. So if you look at some of the data, actually let's do a poll here while I've got you all. This comes from the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity. They poll consumers on all sorts of farm-related issues. Canadian farmers are good stewards of the environment. Raise your hand if you would agree with that statement. Raise your hand if you would disagree. Nobody's brave enough today. 29% would agree with that statement. Now, I'll be completely honest that it doesn't mean that the rest of them disagree with them, but even if they don't have an opinion, it means they're not in our camp, right? So only 29% of people would agree with that statement. Here's a fishier one. This is always more fun. I trust that the government food inspection system ensures food safety. Raise your hand if you would agree with that statement. Ooh, less. Raise your hand if you would disagree with that statement. More. All right, I'm going to phrase it differently, and not because they did it, but I'm always fascinated. Do you think that in Canada we have one of the safest food systems in the world? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you disagree. I always find it fascinating. As soon as you insert, we're the same way. As soon as you insert the word government, we become worried about it. In reality, we're feeding people, and we're telling the consumer that the step between us and them, you shouldn't trust. I would encourage you to start to reset some of that thinking. If you don't trust the food system that's ensuring the safety of your product, how do you expect a consumer to? That's challenge number one for you today. But in the interest of going on, only 23% of Canadians would agree with that statement. Even though the Canadian food inspection system, as we all agreed with, is amongst the most safe in the world. Last one. Canadian food is amongst the most affordable in the world today. This is not food is cheap. This is, compared to other countries, do we have more affordable food than other places in the world? Raise your hand if you agree. Raise your hand if you disagree. Yeah, most agree. Fact is, we usually sit as the third most affordable place to get a meal behind the US and the UK. We're in third place. Canadians would disagree with that. 13%. This is actually one of the pieces of data that comes up more and more is that food is too expensive in Canada, says most Canadians. So, just to summarize what the consumer is thinking, we are pillaging the environment, trying to kill them, and making an incredible profit doing it all, is basically what the consumer is thinking. Obviously, that's putting it far too easy, but there are some real concerns among people where, I'd start to question, should there be concerns? Should some of these three issues be amongst the biggest concerns of a consumer or not? Somebody has told them they need to be concerned about it. Now, here, I picked this photo up. This is actually a historical photo of Stan Eby before he got into the beef business. This is his real passion, is vegetables, if you didn't know. When a consumer thinks about a farmer, they do not think of you with a big feedlot, with big equipment, with any of that. They think of this guy. They think of overalls, straw hats. How many people bring in all their harvest in the fall with a wicker basket? Raise your hand. No, but they generally think that too. The benefit we have is that despite their concern in those other areas about environment, about food inspection, about food affordability, the really good news we have, the thing that we have going for us, is that they trust this person. Even if this person doesn't really exist today in Canadian agriculture, I think it's a really good starting point. That when you talk to somebody who doesn't have any experience in agriculture and you tell them you are a farmer, this is who comes to mind. Because generally, and especially I've heard, the young women in the crowd, I've heard this from them too, if they say that they're a farmer, how many people say, well, you don't look like a farmer, right? Because this is who they think of. Now, obviously, some of us do wear plaids, some of us wear overalls, some of us wear straw hats, so it's not completely inaccurate, but certainly when we start thinking about the scale, it is inaccurate. That this is more along the lines of what I think most of us would think of a farmer, right? Using technology, using equipment, spending an incredible amount of money in the spring and hoping for the best is generally our principle in life. Most people don't get that. So how can we move the consumer from this person which they trust into this person which, they start to think about agriculture a little more and maybe don't trust quite as much? When in reality, this is what's feeding them, right? These are the people, when you're talking, all of you around the room, you don't get your wicker basket out, right? You get the pod out and back it up and send them on their way. You're using big equipment on a regular basis. How do we move the needle? That's one of the things that I've been fascinated with over the last few years is there the potential to move the needle? Because if people are concerned about how their food is produced, where it's coming from, even things like the affordability factor of it, how do we start having a conversation so they don't feel uneasy about it? How do we have a conversation that when they go to the restaurant, they're not feeling guilty ordering the steak when instead they think all they want is the Cobb salad or the wedge salad or something, right? How can we make sure they just feel good about what they're eating? Because at the end of the day, my opinion on it is that when it comes to food, people just want to feel good. It really is that simple. If they are scared of it, if they feel guilty about eating it, they won't eat it. If they feel good about it, they will. How do you make a consumer feel good about what they're eating so they continue to be your consumer? That's one of the challenges we've got. Part of where we run into hiccups is obviously that anti-side, right? So groups like People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, which is very different from People for Eating Tasty Animals, two very different PETAs. This one obviously comes from the animal activist side. And when they started, they were one of the first into it. They didn't start thinking that they wanted everybody to go vegan. They started from a place of trying to pull research animals out of labs. Things like chimpanzees, some of those, they didn't want those being tested on anymore for research purposes. What they found, though, is that if you ask people for money in certain conditions, they'll start to donate it because all of a sudden their heartstrings are tugged at. So that's generally has been their guiding principle and expanding more and more into now where, animal use should be completely zero. Obviously you can't research on them, you can't eat them, you can't use them for entertainment when you think about a circus, you can't, the hardcore ones will say you can't use them for companionship, so you can't have pets, you can't do anything like that. You can't take honey from a beehive because that's for the baby bees and you're stealing from baby bees. I've heard that argument many times. It really becomes like a cult-like religion for a lot of the people that are supporters of this. We have to understand that at the end of the day, for them, for the people at the top that are running these organizations, this is their business. Just like you have a duty at the end of your fiscal year to hopefully make more money than you did last year, so do they. They have budgets to keep, they have staff, they have offices to rent, they have all of that stuff, and they need to make sure they can pay for it at the end of the year. So they use tactics like this. So one like this, help save her. It's not help save it, help save that, help save anything other than her, and it's completely on purpose. They even use her instead of him on purpose. Her connects. And of course, you have to look into their eyes. It has to always be a newborn calf because that actually starts to pull at a heartstring, right? That you don't want to do that. And usually, when you start looking at a group like PETA, they actually get it from the standpoint of they're trying to attract an animal lover. Raise your hand if you consider yourself an animal lover in the room here. I would hope that every beef farmer is an animal lover, right? That you enjoy working with animals, right? They come at it from the exact same point, obviously more from the pet side. That you love your dog, right? Well, let's show you how to do a better job caring for that dog. Or that cat. Don't let them near the fireplace at Christmas. Don't leave them in a hot car in the summertime. And oh, by the way, you love this, so don't eat a steer either because it's an animal too, and you shouldn't do that. That's how they gradually move the needle. They use what they know you are as an animal lover and just try to sneak that needle a little more so that all of a sudden maybe they do feel guilty about eating a certain product. Certainly on the environmental side, I think we can all agree that we've had some interesting times here in this province over the last few years. Like when would we have ever thought a single dead insect would all of a sudden represent something to people? And this is one of those things that, if anybody has a beehive over their front deck, they are going to put an entire can of Raid into that thing because it's inconvenient for them. However, at the same time, they're going to make sure that every other one that's not within their house is protected. And whether or not you have a role in that to play doesn't matter. If they think that there is a role that you have to play, they are going to change the rules. And obviously we saw that. And I think this is one of those things that signals what happens if we don't have some of these conversations. If we don't have a connection to a consumer, they get told a story, truth or not doesn't matter, just the fact that it's a story, and if it's believable, then they'll have the rules changed. From a regulatory perspective, more likely, and we're seeing more and more, from a retail perspective. So all of a sudden a retailer says, things like antibiotic-free chicken, for instance. If they command that, then everybody who's serving that restaurant has to follow those guidelines or you lost your end customer, right? what are some of the things we're already seeing, certainly on the environmental side of things, on the beef industry, but what happens if there are more and more rules that say this is what a diet should be, this is what you can and can't give an animal? Then where does that put your business? You'll still be a farmer, that's not going to change, but all of a sudden what you think is best for the animal won't necessarily matter. It'll be what the customer thinks is best. So this is where all of these start to melt together, is what's the customer thinking, what's the retailer want to do, how do they market that food, what's the activist saying about this? Puts us in the predicament is that our story is being told for us. Everybody's learning about farm production practices from everybody but the farmer. They're being told this is how it's done, this is how it should be done, and we're sitting back just going about our daily chores, which, we all get busy. I don't disagree with that, but at some point, we have to take up a bit of an opportunity to say, you know what? This is how, this is why, this is what we're doing around our place. This is why I think you should feel good, because again, the customer just wants to feel good about choosing our product. We have to understand, as an industry, that no one else is going to build up the trust of farmers, build up the positive impression of agriculture, except for us in this industry. If we think that this is somebody else's job to do, we're out of our minds. Everybody else is just trying to make their buck in the food chain. We have to be the ones to actually talk about what we're doing. Talk about some of the things that we're doing, why we do it, why it's important, so that we continue to have access to that technology, continue to have access to a lot of those things that we think are actually good for the animal, are good for the environment, are good for our communities. We have to be the ones doing it. Dwayne mentioned earlier a couple of projects of mine. I don't know whether you call them hobbies or kind of Christmas hangovers that I decided are good ideas at the time. First one, he mentioned Farm 365 was one that I did a couple of years ago now, where I decided, because there was one thing that on social media, I would snap pictures of stuff around the farm, post them online, and a lot of my non-farmer friends seemed to get a kick out of them. They'd look at them, they'd maybe ask questions, we'd have a conversation next time they came over, all different things like that were just interesting. So I kept posting. The challenge that I find, that I think probably a lot of you find as well too, is that you don't always think of it when you're busy, right? When it's time to go plant corn, posting online isn't the first thing in your mind, right? And that I was 100% guilty of that I could always take a picture of a cow on a slow day because I had time and never took the time on the busy days. When the reality is that the busy days are the best opportunities, right? When things are actually going on around the farm, those are the times to, take the opportunity and post some of this stuff. So I decided that, okay, if I commit to posting a picture every day from the farm, then I'll be forced to stop for 30 seconds in a day and take a picture of what I was doing. We were around the farm anyway. I've got my phone with me all the time anyway. It wasn't necessarily going to be challenging. Posted this. Within a couple of hours, the media started calling and said, oh, this is cool. What a great idea. And I knew I'd gotten myself into a bit of a rabbit hole, because now all of a sudden I had to do it because people were watching. But it also created all of a sudden this awareness. Twitter was my kind of go-to social network, and over about a 24-hour period of time, I added 5,000 followers. Most of those were not farmers, because they'd read it on some paper, they'd read it, front page of this paper, or on this website, or on that TV station, whatever it was, because, it was something that was interesting. First question I got from the first reporter, I knew I hadn't thought this through well enough, was, what's your first picture going to be? Thinking, I have 24 hours to think of that first. What's the rush? But fortunately, newborn calf, what a perfect way to start off the year. And so all of a sudden, I'd added thousands of followers. I had the perfect like newborn calf photo, like my head couldn't fit through the double doors on January 2nd because this was the greatest idea I'd ever had in my whole life. I got a reality check 48 hours into it because all of a sudden, we talked about those activists. You've obviously got the ones that are treating it like a business, but you've got the ones that are usually volunteering, the ones that believe it as a religion. They didn't like the press. I was a big dairy industry lobbyist. I was a shill for Monsanto somehow, taking pictures of cows. You're always a shill for Monsanto, I think. Basically their impression was that this is too much good media attention. We have to change the channel. So they started posting their own stuff. And some of it is where I start to get into some of the lessons in dealing with people. Is that, first of all, especially online, but even in person, you know there are a few wackos in the world. You've talked to them before. On the internet, they breed. That's where they breed. Things like, so here, simple calf hutch. Obviously, a pretty common picture on a dairy farm. Another farmer actually took that photo, and they were, it's kind of the weather like this, right? So they decided they had doors for the huts. They were going to put doors on the front of those hutches to obviously keep the calves that much warmer, right? Keep the wind out of there. The challenge is that whatever you post online, and I don't care if you have 4 friends that are all your closest neighbors, it doesn't matter. If you post something online, as soon as somebody right-clicks, save picture as, that photo is completely gone from your control. Yes, you hold the copyright. Yes, it's your picture, but do you think that really matters to some anonymous, activist? Clearly it doesn't, because Blondes Have More Fun did exactly that. Right-click, save picture as, so all of a sudden the context of the photo is gone, where she describes what she's doing, and she instead says, newborns dragged from their mothers, caged in these boxes to prevent muscle, murdered at 6 weeks. Now, I didn't go to Guelph, I don't have an animal science degree, but in my business, killing my entire offspring at 6 weeks is not good business. And I can tell you that even without the degree, that's just not ideal. But where does that start to become believable? If you don't have the background, certainly they have an idea of what veal is, and it's not positive. No matter what the truth is, it's not positive. And does it look like there's a calf caged in there? Yeah, without the context. So could it be to prevent muscle? Well, maybe if I didn't know any better. So therefore, I've heard about veal, maybe they are murdered at 6 weeks. It all of a sudden becomes believable. So one lesson I have for you is that whenever you post something, and you'll never be able to avoid it completely, but remember you can always be taken out of context. Somebody can always take that for themselves and say whatever they want. So whenever you're posting something, stop. And again, I don't care if it's to just your 10 favorite friends on Twitter that are your only followers. It's in the public domain. Anybody can take that, take it out of context, and use it, not necessarily against you, but against the entire industry. And you don't necessarily want that. They're a very compassionate group by supporting putting all animal abusers to sleep, which just fascinates me when they talk so much about compassion, yet it is not for your well-being. It is not for your emotional state. They will tear you down if given the opportunity, if they think it will benefit them. Which is actually one of those things that we fought with because, correct, raping cows for profit is no different than raping women. So if you are AIing a cow, in their mind, you are raping them. Because that cow already had a bull and a heifer. She's done. She doesn't want any more calves, apparently. So, we ran into this. I know that especially we started getting quite a bit of flack from these animal activists to the point that they were messaging, they'd found my wife online and were messaging her things like this. Like, does he rape you like he rapes the cows? aggressive. All of a sudden, this idea that you want to open up your barn doors screeches to a complete halt because you did not sign up for this, did you? And I know that this is one of the biggest challenges, is getting your head around the wackos online. And trust me, there are a pile of them. I've never met one. They'll tell you there, we had them, they actually said that they were going to drive up and down the roads until they found our farm. And then they were going to tell everybody what it was and what they were going to do. Like, pretty vague that what could they do. Because all of a sudden, I mean, we're like a lot of your places, right? Driveway, house where the kids sleep, barn. Like, it's all together. It's all one. What happens if they do show up? And I know that a lot of other farmers who thought, oh yeah, this is good, I'll post stuff online, backed out of this 180 degrees faster than they got into it, because this is not what they signed up for. And I don't blame anybody who doesn't want that. I think it's really important that if you are putting yourself into a public space, you're going to get this flack. I would also say that on social media, certainly you get a little bit more because it's that anonymous. They don't know who you are, where you live, any of that kind of stuff. So you get a little bit more. But, I mean, if you decide you're going to go into the fair and stand at a booth, nothing's stopping an animal rights activist from walking through that place as well. I know that down around our area, the beef and pork producers get together at the barbecue or the home and garden show in London, and they have their booth. They set them up right in the barbecue section, which is like perfect marketing, really. And they have their booth there. Well, guess what? Not everybody who goes through the home and garden show, it's a great audience if you want to get out of your comfort zone. But guess what? Not everybody is on the same page as you when it comes to eating meat. What happens if you get confronted there? No matter where you are, if you are going to have a conversation, if you want to talk to people about agriculture, you have to face the reality that not everybody is going to agree with you, and some will really try as hard as they can to tear you down so you quit. And I know we were really close to being done too. Because I remember, especially that time that my wife got the message that they were hunting for the farm, you can bet that we drank a lot of whiskey that night. And that we had a really big conversation about what's the role of all of this. Because, you know what, whether or not you tweet a picture, that steer is still going to put weight on as long as you feed him, right? It's the same with cows. As long as I put feed in, the milk comes out. It's not going to change, milk production is not going to change based on how many times I take her picture doing it, right? We can very easily close ourselves off and not do it. The challenge is, and we realize this too, is that that's exactly why they're doing it. They don't want you to have a voice. Because remember, that straw hat farmer, they trust that person way more than an animal rights activist. An animal rights activist ranks in a trustworthiness somewhere between lawyer and used car salesman. Not great. We rank with family, doctors, firefighters. That's where we rank on the trustworthy scale. If you say that you're a farmer and this is what I do, your message means way more than any one of these. And the reality is that the majority of people, we focus a lot on these types of people because they tend to be the most vocal. In reality, most people think they're as crazy as we do. Most people, like especially, they think it's a great stunt when they run up and down the streets of downtown in naked, saying that I'd rather be naked than wear leather or something. And people look at that and say, are you insane? Like, why would you do that? They're doing it to themselves, but that still means that we have to at least come up with the other side of the story, because this is one of the messages that I got at that point in time, was from one of these animal lovers. She's a dog photographer, because that's a career choice today. She messaged me and said, you know what, for 10 years, all I've heard is from the activists. And I knew it wasn't completely true. However, I couldn't help but start to believe it. And all of a sudden, the buying habits started to change. That whenever she went and she bought butter or beef, she felt guilty doing it. How long do you think she's going to feel guilty buying that before she stops buying it? Eventually, it'll happen. She had told me that she was completely off veal because the guilt rode her too far in that, to the point that she wouldn't even let her boyfriend order veal at a restaurant because she couldn't look across at the plate because she knew what it was. That's the way she felt. And whether or not that's the way she should, that's the way she does feel. And obviously it changes buying habits. Fortunately for her, we had a bit of back and forth conversation, still do every once in a while now, and she has a question, and now she doesn't feel guilty eating it. She feels good because she knows why these things are done. She knows what's fiction, what's fact, and of that fact, even if it's a bit ugly, knows why it's done. That's what we've got to get to. A couple of other points in the next. My watch stopped. Good start. What time are we at? 11:30. Okay. Brand new watch. I guess you're supposed to wind these. Anyway, couple of points. So in the dairy business, this is the milk truck driver. And Alex has posted a lovely picture of his milk truck driver taking a sample of milk. And so I don't know if everybody's familiar with how this works, but milk truck backs up to the farm. Before they pump that milk on, takes a little sample in a little jar, puts that in a cooler in the back of the truck, then loads all the milk on. Before that milk is unloaded, it's tested for particularly antibiotic residue. If somebody got penicillin and got milked that night, is basically what they're looking for. If that load is found to have it, they'll test every single vial to figure out who it is, and then they'll bill that farm for that load of milk. That's the safety system. So in the dairy industry, all we talk about is the safety of milk. It's the thing that we love to talk about more than anything else. There's no antibiotic residue because it's tested. Every single load is tested. It can't get through the cracks. My neighbor across the road, who's in beef and grain, has lived there my entire life, didn't know that this was a step taking place. Did anybody else not know this was a step taking place in the dairy business? A few? One of those realities that he didn't know because nobody bothered to tell him. What are some of the things that you're doing? If we're talking about consumers don't necessarily trust the food safety system, what are some of the practices that you do on your farm to ensure food safety? And if you're doing them, how do people know about them? Have you told one single person about them before? Probably not. We just do it because it's the right thing to do. But if nobody knows what that step is, how are they supposed to feel good about the safety system? Somebody else is telling them the opposite. You need to be there to have that conversation. And it's one of those things that certainly, my view is that, I've been able to do a lot of this on social media. Some of you in the room I know do it as well. Some of you don't want to even touch social media. Completely okay, but that doesn't get you off the hook. Because I know all of you have a network of, friends. Maybe it's at church, maybe it's somebody you golf with, maybe it's a group you volunteer with, the Legion, the Rotary Club, whatever. There will be people in that don't know some of the safety steps that you do on your farm. Have you ever had a conversation with them about it? I think too often we get into this mindset that, I'm from Hanover, it's a rural community, everybody knows what I do. Guess what? They know as little as the person in downtown Toronto. They just get the front row seat, like Mike talks about, fishbowl farming. They just get to see it every day, how it's done, and make their impression of it, whether they have all the facts or not. Another thing that I find fascinating about things, so this is the sun coming up around our place. Whoopee, the sun came up today. Isn't that thrilling? I bet it goes down tonight too. one of those things that for us in agriculture, a lot of times, because especially this time of year, we're coming out of the barn when the sun is, kind of coming up. So usually, Dad and I have the conversation, oh, nice morning, yeah, nice morning. That's it. That's our appreciation for the natural wonder around us. You will do the exact same thing. And if it's cold and windy, you go shit. That's basically the conversation we have. And I was posting these pictures because, I like them. I like the view that they present. But at some point you think, okay, how long can I keep posting pictures of the sun coming up? Like, seriously. It's the sun, it's coming up. But then I started actually getting a few messages from people. And they said, my favorite thing that you post is of the sunrise and sunsets. And I say, well, that's very kind of you. That wasn't my intention. I was hoping you really appreciated the milk truck driver at work. But if you appreciate the sunrise, great. Why do you appreciate the sunrise? Well, you know what? From their view, maybe it's in the suburbs, maybe it's in a condo tower in the city, they never see it. There's a reason people come up here to go to the cottage so that they can see the sun come up and go down. Because at home, they can't. All of a sudden, it builds in a little bit of perspective as to some of the things you value. I can take a picture of a sunrise and say, wow, I really like this sunrise. And they say, you know what? I love sunrises too. It's like we're the same person. We believe in the same things. And I say it half jokingly, but when you start talking about balancing some of those values, some of the things that you appreciate, some of the things that you value, if it all of a sudden connects with them, all of a sudden your trust factor just skyrocketed. Because all of a sudden they feel that, oh, you're not just, an anonymous person. You have feelings, you have emotion, you believe in the same things you do. All of a sudden your conversation starts on an even better foot. So don't be afraid to, just because all you want to do is talk about, the safety or the affordability or all of those important things. Don't forget to talk about just kind of those nice things. Why did you decide to farm? Did you decide to farm because you really wanted, to produce a safe food? Maybe. But it probably had more to do with you like being your own boss. You liked working outside most days. You liked working with animals. Those are probably the reasons you became a farmer. Talk about that kind of stuff too, because that can actually carry even more weight. Same thing goes for a newborn calf. I don't know how many here are in the cow-calf business, but man, does a newborn calf sell pictures. They eat it up. Now, don't remind them that they're going to eat it up. They don't like to make that connection right away. So, this is, future steak is not the hashtag for this photo. This is my most popular photo of all time, is of a bull calf. Well, guess what? He's not kicking around anymore. I don't announce that to the world. But it does the same thing that the sunrise does. It talks about the values, that this is, because let's be honest, a newborn calf is pretty cool, right? Watch it get up, watch it get nursing fast. It's just, you sit and watch for that because it's a cool sight. Obviously, it's important too, but it's just fascinating. And I know that some of us, we do it too. Oh man, last night we had a calf. Oh great, she calved out. I did not wait to see if it got up. I did not wait to see if it nursed because it was too late. You'll be fine. I'll see the next calf do that. But think again of how many other people in the world get to experience that. Almost nobody. Use your surroundings to your advantage because it will build trust. It will build conversations. It's what people want to hear about. The thing that people don't necessarily want to hear about, and this is where, certainly I think we in agriculture tend to get a rut in, is that how many here had a perfect growing season this year? Raise your hand. How many people had a perfect growing season last year? Right from start to finish? The year before? The year before that? The year before that? No, we never ever have a perfect growing season, right? ever. There's always something wrong. And legitimately, this picture of soybeans at my place doesn't look ideal, does it? Now, fortunately, the rain stopped, and that actually was my best yielding field that year. Things come out, it's amazing how resilient crops are a lot of the time. But one of the things that we find ourselves doing a lot is complaining about what's wrong. One of the hard realities we as farmers have to learn is that nobody cares about our problems. And I say that completely serious because everybody else's problems to them are more important. You got too much rain, prices are too low, but you know what? Somebody just got laid off. Somebody's parents are ill. Somebody's child's been acting up in school. Divorce, health issues, bankruptcy, all those types of things. It doesn't matter. Whatever the problems are in your own world are the most important problems. And that goes for every other person. What we run into too much is that if we complain too much, people will turn us off. People hear too much negative stuff as it is. I think what we can actually tell that actually is a little bit different is how good we have it, even if it's not perfect. Because, in a situation like this, as I say, it's really easy to say, wow, too much rain, this sucks, or, oh look, there's the sun, please stay sun, because it would be really nice to have dry weather. Just those two comments come out in completely different perspectives. You can still address that things can be tough, the realities of agriculture, but you cannot make it seem that your problems are paramount to everybody else's, because to them they're not, and they'll turn you off. That's one of the other realities. I keep looking at that. Just quickly, actually we'll skip through this. So what I want you to think about, what I want to challenge you to do is leaving here, you certainly don't want to work outside, do you? So therefore, I want you to think through what could you do once a week to actually try to have some kind of a positive impact. Whether it be a conversation, whether it be a picture, any one of those things, what can you do? I've showed that there are certainly things you can do on social media. Great if that's what you want to do. If you don't want to do it, there's lots of other opportunities. Anybody seen Peterson Farm Brothers video online on YouTube?
He was here last year on Crops Day.
Oh, he was here in Crops Day. Cool. Greg? Was it Greg was up? Cool. Great guys do these kind of entertaining YouTube videos. I want you to raise your hand again if you have watched a Peterson Farm Brothers video. Nice and high for me for a minute. How many people, keep them up. I didn't tell you to put them down. We're stretching here. Making you work before lunch. How many people shared that video with somebody else? Hands go down at aggressive rates. I would challenge you as to why, if you liked it, why didn't you pass it on to even one more person? Even if it is somebody at church, somebody at golf, somebody at Rotary, somebody at Lioness, whatever it is, take the opportunity when it's presented. You, unless, Stan and Steve want to start creating music videos for all of us to watch, it'd be awesome. But if they're not going to, why don't we start passing on some of the stuff that's already there for us? Because in reality, there is thousands of pieces of content online that you can use for advantage. Maybe it's not exactly what your farm looks like, but who cares? If you believe in the message, share it with somebody else. That can count as your 1 week. Yeah, 5 more minutes. Whew. Okay, we'll fly. Mr. Veldman here is a veal farmer. So when you talk about, you sit and you have a conversation with a stranger and say, I'm a farmer, and they feel very good about it, I don't think Josh has that same reality if he starts with, I'm a veal farmer. I don't think that same trust level just crosses paths because most people have a negative reaction to it. Case in point was W5, and some of you will remember when they were on their big campaign with Mercy for Animals, that Mercy for Animals would do undercover video of some kind of a livestock farm and then give it to W5, and they'd make a whole segment on it for the show. They did eggs and pigs and turkeys and dairy, and veal was another one. The Woodstock Sentinel Review ran a story the next Monday and said how awful veal farming was and what the treatment of. Like, first of all, know your audience. The Woodstock Sentinel Review in Oxford County was running a story about how bad veal was. Poor editorial decision. But second of all, I think one of the things that we tend to do as farmers is get mad, right? We maybe cancel the subscription, maybe you just throw it in the garbage and are grumpy with everybody you run into for the rest of the day. That tends to be our reaction. Josh called up the paper and said, I saw your story. I don't like seeing calves mistreated either. Why don't you come to my farm and we'll talk about how veal's raised here in Oxford County? And they did. And the story, all of a sudden, turns 180 degrees overnight because all he did was just call up somebody and say, you know what? Why don't you come out and have a look at what it really looks like? Again, that's not the thing that everybody wants to do, but it's an option to do. There's classrooms. Anybody ever go into a classroom, talk to kids about being a farmer? Anybody raise your hand? A few? Certainly, I always find it quite fascinating. And again, this is not something that you have to go down to Kitchener or Guelph to do, because I know, when my mom went to school, it was all farm kids. When I went to school, same school, half of them were farm kids. Now my daughter is one of 2 farm kids. Like, same school, same rural area, it's just the reality of our landscape and of our neighbors today. So you can still go and talk to the school in Hanover, talk to the school in Chesley, talk to the school in Owen Sound, because there will be just as many kids there that haven't seen a cow before. Or, this is actually with a classroom in downtown Toronto, and all of them have video chat now. You can Skype into almost any classroom you want in the country. I know one farmer, an egg farmer, who put Wi-Fi in her barn and sets up a tour once a week with a different classroom. So she takes her tablet around and she shows off the hens, she shows off the feed, she shows off the eggs. She does it for about a half an hour, and then she signs up and goes about her day. She doesn't get clean clothes on. She doesn't have to leave the farm. She just takes half an hour a week touring that class around. They have a better idea of what egg production is like. Is there an opportunity for you to do something like that? Pretty neat idea. Finally, this is my last point, and then we'll go to lunch, my challenge is how many of you have had a conversation with the younger generation about all of this? Because really, whether it's your kids, whether it's your grandkids, sending them off to school, there's been a teacher there that's told them something bad about modern agriculture. They've had classmates who are not eating meat for a variety of reasons. Is your child or grandchild prepared to have a conversation about this? If you don't want to talk to a consumer, that's fine. I would challenge you to talk to somebody else who can talk to a consumer. You're the ones with the knowledge. Is there an opportunity to have a discussion so that they know how to react when their friend tells them, oh, I'm going off beef because it's terrible for the planet? Do they know how they can respond? Or when, the teacher talks about carpet bombing pesticides, which is actually, unfortunately, in one of the textbooks, what that means, that they can not tell the teacher they're an idiot, because that's not going to go well, but how are you preparing them well enough that they can have an actual conversation to say, you know what, I don't necessarily see it this way. Here's some of the things that we do on our farm, or my grandparents do on their farm, or my cousins do, or can I find somebody else to come to the classroom to present the other side, whatever it may be. Maybe they show the movie Food Inc. Has anybody seen the movie Food Inc. before? Don't do it without a stiff drink in your hand. But that's been showed in thousands of classrooms across the country as a way that agriculture is. Is the younger generation well enough prepared to have that conversation? So my final thought is for you, what can your one act be knowing that if we are to expect the consumer to trust the food safety system, to feel good about eating beef, who is going to tell them about it? No one else is going to. This job is up to us. We just have to get at it. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, Andrew. A few questions.
I've got one here from a live streamer. How do you ensure that you are communicating with someone outside your comfort zone and simply not talking to others in ag? Do you measure it the same way?
No, I certainly don't measure it the same way. Certainly, now I'm not opposed to talking with people within the industry because, as I said, like that milk sampling issue, for instance, that's another farmer that learned something about my business. I think that can still be a bit of a success, but obviously the end result is you want to talk to the teacher or the dietitian or your golf friend. First of all, if you want to talk to people outside of that circle, you have to find people outside of the circle. I think too often we figure that, okay, people will come to us because they will want to know our wealth of wisdom. They're just not going to find us. If you want, you have to go and find, maybe there's a blogger that talks about beef that has not the first clue about beef production. Take the time to message them. Send them a note and say, here I am, here's some of the things I've posted, let me know if you have questions. Things like that. We have to seek some of them out. And certainly, I always find those to be, the questions you get from them will also be very telling as to whether or not they're in agriculture or not. So, yeah, Mike.
And Andrew, one of the questions, or one of the issues we deal with is food fraud. So we have somebody who's raising something that's, say, not organic, selling as organic, raising something that's, or some of the big restaurant chains that say, okay, all of our stuff is blah, 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 when in actual fact it's not. But they're competing directly with us, so our product costs more to raise, more to get to the counter than theirs does. How do we deal with that to educate the consumer that, maybe what they're advertised as whatever is not actually what it is?
I think there's two things you need to do with that. Certainly one, the CFIA and I have an interesting relationship back and forth in which I complain a lot and they sometimes listen and sometimes tell me I'm insane. But I think one of the things we have to do is we have to call some of that out. And I know some of it's even with our neighbors within our industry. It's not necessarily, confronting them directly. Maybe you do at the start. But I think there is a role. There's a regulatory system in place that I think that, we need to use every once in a while to say, here's what's wrong, here's the proof I have, now go after it. It'll take them a long time, but I have had some success with, particularly on labels, when things are labeled incorrectly, that they are forced to be pulled. So you kind of have some success, and I think that's one way. I think the other way is that it's all about the relationship, right? It's really hard for a consumer to have a relationship with the keg or with McDonald's. They like it, but it's not really that touchy-feely relationship, where I think that that's where you interject yourself in there, particularly for you, Mike, in terms of, having that direct connection is that, this is my farm, my family, my land, this is what I want to protect. Your story, I think, just feels better. Certainly, if at the end of the day, all they're wanting to do is compete on price, then that's not your customer anymore, right? And the challenge I think we face is that as an industry, everybody still wants cheapest. That still trumps every other food purchasing decision is still, is it on sale? Still trumps it all. It's just, how do we make sure that that stays as the number one question and not necessarily, all the other steps that go along with it, I think. So.
Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, I think we'll cut the questions off, so we have another round of applause for Andrew, please.
Thanks, everybody.
We have Doug from Elanco coming up to thank Andrew for us.
When Lori first approached Dwayne and I from Zoetis about having Andrew come in, we were pretty excited. Twitter and social media is something that we're pretty big on, so it was something near and dear to our hearts. And I agree, everything that Andrew said. We need to do a better job of getting out and talking to not only consumers but our neighbors. I think as an ag community, we're really good at talking to each other, but we don't get our message out really well. Just one quick story. Andrew was talking about getting out to the schools and talking, and how people who put stuff up on social media, things can be taken the wrong way, but you never know where that's going to come from. I spoke to my 12-year-old's class about 3 or 4 years ago, and they allowed him to introduce me, which is fine, except a few of you have met Reed. He introduced me as his dad, who was a drug dealer. You never, ever know where it's going to come from, but somebody's always going to spin something the wrong way. Anyways, on behalf of the crowd, Andrew, the organizers, our friends at Zoetis, and of course Elanco, I'd like to thank you for your time today. It was incredible. You did a great job. Thank you.
Thanks very much, sir.
Okay, before our meal, we have Jim Snyder coming up to give us a few minutes on CAFA. So, Jim, here. If you want to use that.
Thanks very much, Don. Yeah, I'm going to wear the CAFA hat today, and just CAFA is the Canadian Association of Farm Advisors. There's many of the folks in the room here that belong to that organization. We're a loosely knit group right across Canada of people who, as you might suspect, help you out in advisory services throughout your business. So there'll be bankers, there'll be accounting firms like ours, and a host of others. Some of the things that we do, perhaps this year, one of the things that we're very proud to be involved in, our executive director is Liz Robertson, and so you're probably aware of a lot of the controversy that was started on July 18th around the changes to the professional tax, professional corporations. And so that resulted in a phone call from the Prime Minister's office and said, thou shalt be summoned to Ottawa to explain why you think this issue involves agriculture. So there were only about 21,000 of us that went down there. But in fact, we did have an impact, and the process did work, not to the degree perhaps to which we might have liked it, but it worked. The other thing I want to touch on is a little bit of something that Andrew mentioned, and that is our role as messengers. And I think it's becoming painfully aware. I'm becoming painfully aware that while my message might be the same as yours, that I might not always be the best messenger, because Andrew touched a little bit on the stereotypes in agriculture, and one of the stereotypes that I find myself faced with is that I think I am now pale, male, and stale. And I think that it's really important that we recognize, and I want to give you just one personal example of this. So there's a member of our board, a young woman who has done a great service to agriculture. She was out just shopping in London the other day, and she picked up, she met a friend of hers who was not from agriculture, who had a jug of organic milk in her shopping cart. And so they just had a conversation, and she said, "Oh, I see you're getting milk." And she said, "How come you didn't get how come you're getting the organic stuff?" She said, "Well, I know that way that there's no additives in it." And she said, "Well, there's no additives in any Canadian milk." "Oh, really?" And so she put it back. And that was the end of the conversation. And it really came down to the issue of trust, because she was with a colleague that she trusted. And had I given out that advice, or the gentleman that just spoke before with the Elanco, that we might have been perceived to be a paid shill or whatever, or less. And I think it's really important not only that we deliver the right message, but we be more conscious about who that messenger is. And that young woman that was here yesterday setting up her booth with her 10-month-old baby, she has a lot higher level of trust within the purchasing community, our consumers, than we do. And I think, so my role going forward for the next week is to take the sound bites that I've accumulated over 40 years of being in this business, and CAFA as well, and make sure that we share them with those people like Andrew and your colleagues who are doing such a wonderful job of being advocates and spreading that message. So that's a little bit about what we're doing behind the scenes at CAFA. So I encourage you, if you have a question,
that, you know, you want to have that conversation and you need to know where to go for that information, go to CAFA website, go to Agriculture More Than Ever website, call a CAFA member, and all of us would be more than happy to help you out with that, and we won't send you a bill. Thank you very much.